This is Karen with newclevelandradio.net, and it is time for Avoid the Maze, You Are Special. Avoid the Maze, You Are Special has transformed from Avoid the Maze because I want to talk to people like Jennifer who may not necessarily label herself as special, but she has something special to share. And I think many of us have to be more aware and more open-minded. I met Jennifer on podmatch.com, and when I read her bio, the thing that just jumped right out at me was complex PTSD and depression. I'm going to let her tell you where it came from, but I'm also going to tell you that my son suffers from that same diagnosis and was suffering it for years before we were aware it was a thing and that it was real. And there are certain things that we just can't stop. We can't help. He's got to learn to help himself. So, Jennifer, welcome to Avoid the Maze and take us on a journey.
Thank you so much, Karen. Thanks for having me on. So I am a single mom and I live with complex PTSD and major depressive disorder from childhood trauma. I lived with my abuser until I was 14. My family was my mother, my father, who was my abuser, and two older brothers. And when I was 14, one of my older brothers decided to tell a trusted adult what was happening in our family, that my abuser was not only abusing them, but me in many different ways. So my abuser left our house. And a lot of people will think that that's when trauma ends. Okay, the abuser is gone. So that's, it's all over now. They can start to heal. But there are other traumas that happen afterwards. Specifically for me, we went into the court system. They wanted to press charges against my abuser. But what my brothers and I ran into is that we were like a bother to the DA, to the guardian ad litem. They just didn't want to have to deal with it. And it was very difficult. My brothers spoke about the abuse that happened to them a lot quicker than I did. I was 14. I was still really young and I didn't know the words or what to say about what had happened to me. And when I did actually come out with that to the court, they didn't believe me. They thought I was just adding on because I wanted to be a part of all of this, which no child wants to be a part of a court case against an abuser.
Absolutely.
And so they put me in front of a grand jury to talk about really intimate details about sexual abuse. And that was very traumatic for me. And after 5-6 years of fighting in this system, my abuser only got 4 years. And he was out and he was able to reoffend, which he did. And while this was all going on, I was going through so many different things. I went to college. By my sophomore year is when my abuser went to prison. And I kept saying not yet to my healing journey because there was so much going on in my world. And there was this fear that I wasn't going to be able to handle anything if I started looking at the abuse. So I would say, not yet. I'm in college. Not yet. I just started a career. And then it was not yet. I'm a mother. How could I possibly try to unpack all of this trauma when I have these two gorgeous little beings who need me? What if I can't do what I need to do for them? And then after our divorce, it was even scarier for me because I was the caregiver, the sole caregiver for the most part. And again, if I couldn't function, I couldn't bring my kids to my son has hockey. He's a hockey player. And, I wasn't going to be able to do the things that moms do, like,
Sure.
quote, normal moms do. So I kept going with that not yet, until one day my brain said, right now. I owned a shop in my downtown and I had to close it and I had to go into bankruptcy. And it was a real hit to my self-esteem, my ego. I felt a part of me was leaving because I was that, boutique owner, and I had so many people that I loved and cared about, and I was no longer going to be there for them. My brain broke at that point and said, right now is when you have to start this journey, because you have to do it for yourself and for the people that you love.
So how old were your children at this time? Because again, as a nurturing parent, we keep thinking, we want to put things off until they're stable, until they're ready. But you obviously had to do this. Did you think they were ready for it as well? Or did that not even cross your mind?
Well, so my oldest actually has a little bit, issues with mental health as well. And during his childhood, we ended up working with DMH, Department of Mental Health, for him. So I did have some people behind me helping me with my children as well
Sure.
to help them understand. And at one point, I did go inpatient because I felt it was really necessary for me. I was having suicidal ideation and I needed my meds to be fixed. They just weren't doing what they needed to do. So I went inpatient because that was important for me to get that done for them. And my kids were scared. My kids were, worried for me, but they also understood that taking care of myself was going to be the right thing for them as well.
Well, you had to put
So
your oxygen mask on first, because if that
that's
mask
it.
isn't on, you can't help them. You're going to fall over and collapse. And that's something that we all know, but we are so afraid to put that into play because we just want to take care of all the other pieces and parts, thinking, okay, I'm strong enough. I'll get through this. I've gotten through so many things. So here you now are an inpatient. Where are your kids during all this time? Because that's got to be scary as a single mom.
Yes, they were with their dad. So their dad did take them, and he is a regular part of their life. He saw them on weekends, that kind of thing. So he did take them, and my mother also helped with them. And it was really important for me to take that step. And as you said, putting them an oxygen mask on, I tell parents all the time, especially when their children are dysregulated and that kind of thing, put the oxygen mask on yourself, because we weren't taught how to feel our emotions, right?
Right.
We were told to push them down, not make people uncomfortable. Don't make grandma uncomfortable with your sadness,
Yes.
and don't be an angry girl, that kind of thing. We learned that. So we didn't learn how our emotions were important to us.
Yeah.
So putting that oxygen mask on, as you said, is so important for parents.
I know there's still days today, now that my two boys are grown, they both live away from home, quite a distance. Um, I sometimes forget to put that mask on. I'm so busy worrying about something that they may have said to me in a phone conversation, which could have been really nothing. But my mom brain kicks in and, oh, what can I do to take care of them? And I have to remind myself, wait a second, you got to take care of yourself because you're going to get yourself sick worrying about this. And it's probably not something to worry about. An example is my son calls me yesterday, um, and he twisted his ankle, and he's very accident prone. And he says he can't walk on it. So my first reaction is, okay, go to the emergency room, go to, urgent care, get it checked out. And I got so wrapped up into it. I wasn't listening to him saying, Mom, I twisted my ankle. It's not swollen. It hurts. No, it's hard to walk on, but I know what to do. But I didn't hear all that. I just heard. And so I jumped in and I was hyperventilating for a number of hours. And then he called to say to me, Mom, it hurts, but I can walk on it. I'm going to do what I think is best. Okay. So as moms, I understand that we have this need to fix things. because that's what we were
Absolutely.
taught. That's what our emotions are all about. So when you got out of rehab, I'm sure your journey wasn't over because you had just completed only one phase of recovery, if you could even call it recovery.
Right, right. Yeah, I like to think of it more as that healing journey, starting that off, because there are so many life journeys that we have. And I think this one was my most important one. And after that, I got the people that I needed. I got the most incredible therapist. And this is really interesting. And I like to tell this to people. First of all, if you don't feel something with a therapist, that doesn't mean that you're not into therapy. You can find someone that works with you and that you feel good with. Don't give up on having someone. I think it's so important that we have someone outside of our lives to talk to because we're going to tell them everything.
Right.
We're going to be open about our feelings, about everything. When you're talking with friends and family, you keep those little things inside and you're not really spilling the whole tea, right?
Right.
You're not telling the truth there, right? So I really support people getting into individual therapy if that's what they feel is right for them. But my therapist is much younger than me. And at first, so I'm 50. And at first I was saying, this girl can't help me. She's not even old enough to help me, right? What does she know? But the best thing about going with a younger therapist is that they've been into school with more therapies, more modalities. They've learned different things that may help. And they're learning things that are specific to complex PTSD or depression, anxiety. They're learning these new therapies and modalities. And so it was like magic for me when she started talking about the different ways that we can handle the process of going through trauma.
It's interesting that you say that because so many of us feel that we have to be either in therapy or being coached by somebody who's absolutely walked through our shoes. Well, nobody's ever really walked through our shoes. Okay. There are many, many individuals like yourself out there who had an abuser and it has stuck with you all these years, even though you got removed from it. It got removed physically, but it didn't get removed mentally. But sometimes we think, well, if my therapist has ever been through this, or this isn't their specialty, or my coach has never been through this, how can they help me? And the reality of it is a good therapist and a good coach is a listener. They're not a judge, and they don't make you go back to being in the womb and how you felt. There may be something in that kind of therapy, and if it works for people, that's fine. But what I'm finding for individuals like yourself and like my son, it was about trying to figure out how can I keep moving forward. I know this is part of my life. It's going to always be here, but how do I keep it from constantly surfacing for me? And for him, it's been very, very difficult. It's getting easier over time, but it's because he also found a therapist who communicates with him and he feels like he's sitting there talking to somebody who really cares. And there's the difference.
Yes.
So now you've got this great therapist. For our listeners, therapy probably never ends because it's your outlet.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It's so important to remember that your healing journey is not linear, that there are going to be ups and downs. It's like a roller coaster. And you don't have a beginning or end to it. You can choose to start the journey. But when people ask me where I'm at with this journey, I say right in the middle. And I'll probably say that 10 years later and 20 years later, I'm right in the middle because there's a lot to unpack, especially with complex PTSD, because complex PTSD is when someone has been living in their trauma for a while. It's child abuse, domestic violence, vets, also homelessness is a big trigger for complex PTSD, and you feel it in your body. It changes your body chemistry. It changes the neurons in your brain. So for me, that makes me hypervigilant, and so my anxiety levels are higher than most people in my norm, right? So it's really important to understand that when you're going into these different modalities, that some of these things are going to help for one day and then maybe a couple of days later, but you're going to have to switch off with different modalities and learning to pack your own emotion toolbox, your coping skills toolbox, and have that readily available for you.
It's interesting that you say that. You just made me a better person, and I have to thank you because we talked before we came on air that my youngest son, and I don't want to use the word suffer, but he experiences the effects of PTSD. And he had experienced it for almost an extra 5 years after it happened, but never told us when it happened. And the only reason he brought it up at that point, 5 years later, was the bully who inflicted it on him died from an overdose.
Oh, wow.
And my son's first reaction was, yay, he's dead. And then he felt remorse. And when he said that day, I said, oh, how can you say that? And he goes, just the way I feel. And he's not that kind of a person. And, was just like grating at me. And I knew this kid had bullied him, but I didn't know to the extent. And then when it finally came out, and he sat there sobbing, and he said, I didn't want to tell you. I didn't want you to think less of me. And my heart went out because it's like, you're my son. I wouldn't have. He said, but Mom, I know what you would have done. You would have gone to the school. You would have gone to the authorities. It would have made my life harder. He said, I was trying to make my life easier. He thought too, he could just pack it away and it wouldn't surface. And all of a sudden, so many questions got answered for me. And I realized I know a lot of people who are going through things like this. And I'm not going to say I've been unkind, but I didn't think I was being kind enough. And that's where my personality started to change. It was like, I'm not going to judge you.
Right.
And even if you tell me what's going on, I'm not going to judge you because we all have our backstories.
Absolutely.
So you're in the middle of your journey. Tell me some of the things that you're doing to help make yourself more in tune with, I don't necessarily say blocking things out, but not letting it affect you as intensely. And how are you helping others on similar journeys? Because I know you are.
Yes, yes. So that's where the coping skills toolbox comes in. It's really important for people to understand that we can help ourselves through those intense traumatic moments, reliving, dissociation, those kind of things. We do have different ways that we can help ourselves. And while I was in hospital, and after that, I went outpatient at the same hospital. I'm very lucky to live near one of the biggest mental health hospitals in the country. It's called McLean Hospital. And so they have a bunch of different modalities, but I started working with DBT, which is dialectical behavioral therapy. And it was specifically created for people with PTSD. And what it does is it has four main tenets. It's interpersonal communication, it's emotion regulation, distress tolerance, and mindfulness. So there's these four big, tenets of it. And inside of those, we talk about emotions and how we react to them and what we can do to offset the intensity of them. And when I was in hospital, I actually came up with the idea that I'm working on right now. It's called My Moody Monster. And it's this pull apart monster, a plush doll that I created for myself when I was in a therapeutic group. I said to them, I wish I had a monster I could rip apart and throw across the room and bang against the wall. And people were like, you should have that. So I created this ragtag monster. And I realized when I put the Velcro on the head, arms, and legs that I could rip it apart when I needed to. And it was working for me. And I thought, well, if this can work for me, I'm sure this could work for others as well. Others not only going through trauma, but kids in general, because they don't know anything about emotions. They're these little, like these little creatures that come up. And again, this is where we talk about the, putting the oxygen mask on first, because we all need to have these coping skills to help us. And so while I was working on Moody, I was waiting for prototype. I was getting all these different prototypes in. I realized, I need to start really helping others understand emotions, because that's what Moody's all about. And so I started doing these Moody talks. So I'd pick an emotion each month. And the first week I'd go through, what does this emotion feel like inside? What does it, do to your body? What are the words that we use, and what are the intensity of those words, so that we can get an understanding of what that emotion is? And after that, I went into the different coping skills that I use in my toolbox that have helped me with those emotions. And I started putting them up on YouTube and Instagram and all that kind of thing. And they were really helpful, not only to me, because I was going over these toolbox, coping skills myself, but I was always, telling other people how they can work for them. You don't have to have complex PTSD. You don't have to have depression or anxiety to build a toolbox for yourself. So I think that that's really important for people to understand. And it's a way that we can grow emotionally, and to also connect with our loved ones in a way that we're not misunderstanding each other, right? And opening up that communication for especially children, because they don't have the words for it. And what I tell people is the best part about Moody is you can rip them apart, have all that frustration out. The best part is sitting down with Moody and putting them back together again, because then you have that chance to communicate what happened. What can we do next time to better cope with that big frustration that you had? So I found that the work that I've been doing with Moody has really been like a love letter to my own healing journey.
I love that. It's interesting. My mother always said that she'd never experienced depression. She didn't know what it was. She didn't understand why other people went through it. But yet, when I read your thing about Moody, I realized my mother did have depression. My mother was a seamstress. So she had a regular pincushion. But later in life, she made this little cloth doll. Most of the time, that cloth doll just sat on her sewing machine, did not have pins in it. But if you went to her house and there were pins in it, but not in the pincushion, that was her aggression. That's where she was putting all those thoughts. And I spent the last 2.5 months of her life with her as she was dying. And I asked her, I said, what was that little doll you made? And first she said, I don't know what you're talking about. And my mother did make other dolls. So I said, no, the one that sat on your sewing machine. And she goes, why? Why do you need to know? And I said, because Mom, you said you've never been depressed in your life, but I think you've hidden it. And I went through deep depression, and she like wanted to shake me. It was like, come on, let's get this out of you. And she finally said, so you found my secret. She said, when I really didn't like somebody, I put pins in it. She said, if I had a conversation with you on the phone and you upset me, I put pins in it and was like, oh my God, and I said, I'm not sure if any of us felt those pins, but I'm so glad you had a way to put it in there. But then it made me realize that I've gone through depression a good portion of my life. And I used to take, and I still do, write. But when I used to write in the beginning, it was always about who I was mad at, why it was their fault, how they made me feel. But when I went through therapy about 15 years ago, first thing my therapist said to me was, it's not about the divorce from your first husband. It's not because your parents idolized your brothers over you. It has nothing to do with that. Okay. When you write about how you're feeling, find something positive about it. And all of a sudden, my writing took off. I can still say that something has upset me, but now what can I do to change that? And that's what I talk to my clients about. It's not going to take it away, but if you can reevaluate it and find something good from it, either I'm never going to go back there again, so I'm going to have to go on this path, or I'm going to be aware that that can happen. And these are the things like you talked about having in your toolbox, how to respond to those things. Now, for our listeners, I talk about toolboxes all the time, as do many of my guests, like Jennifer. We're not talking about that metal toolbox with the hammer and the screwdriver in it. It's an emotional toolbox, is the way I see it. And it's in your head, but you can take out the pieces as you need them. So, can you give us a little hint about what's in your toolbox?
Oh, absolutely. I would love to. My toolbox is filled with many DBT skills, many skills that are actually physical as well. One thing that I do is I carry this molding clay and have essential oils with it. And I'll put a little bit of the essential oil in the mold clay, and then I'll use it basically as a fidget. And it keeps me grounded when I start to dissociate. It's keeping me in the here and now, which is so important, because dissociation can be minutes, it can be half hour. It all depends on where you're at. So grounding yourself when you feel yourself dissociating is very important. So putting that physical part to it and feeling everything that's around you is a great way to keep yourself in the here and now. I have a great coping skill called check the facts in DBT. And a lot of us, we have something happen and we have a primary emotion. And we may feel that emotion, but some people, especially people who have been in trauma, may actually jump to a secondary emotion. And that is because you feel safer in the secondary emotion. And for me, whenever I feel fear, I automatically jump to anger because I feel I'm more in control of anger. And, I think that it's more controllable for me. But that's not necessarily what I should be feeling in that situation, right? I should be actually feeling the fear in that. So checking the facts is a way to step away from the situation, taking the emotion out of it, actually step by step what happened in that situation, figuring out the actual emotion that I should be feeling in that, and asking myself, well, is that what I'm feeling? And if it's not, going back to the situation and understanding that I jumped from fear to anger because that is just what my brain does. It's, again, a coping mechanism.
Sure.
But that doesn't really help in a lot of situations, especially when it's interpersonal communicating, correct? Like being fearful and then jumping to anger can really break down communication.
Right.
So it's really stepping away when you notice your secondary emotion, step back and you tell yourself, no, you have to be feeling this emotion, the one that is correct for this situation, so that you can communicate and you can understand. And maybe next time you're not going to jump to that second emotion, that anger. So yeah, there are some really great tools that you can use. And DBT has so many. You can go online and just look up DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, and they give you tons of different coping skills and also a lot of information about emotions. I think it's really important for people to understand the language they use when they're feeling this emotion and the intensity of it, because that's going to tell you where you're at and what coping skill you need to help you through it.
You know, it's interesting because my last corporate America job, um, every Friday, our manager would call us all in for a group meeting, but she'd started off with going around the room asking us a question like, what's your favorite book? What's your favorite music? What's your favorite food? Yada, yada. And I didn't realize I was going through a lot of depression at the time. I loved what I did, but the culture was killing me. But I didn't see it that way. And I would go into these meetings, and I was the oldest one in the group, probably by a good 20 years. So um, I never felt like I truly connected with this group. And so it would come time, Karen, what's your favorite book? I don't know. And as soon as I said that internally, I was angry. I wanted to lash out at the manager and say, why are we doing this stupid exercise every single week? But I didn't. And instead, I just carried it inside of me. Well, one Friday after the meeting, she called me back into the room and she said, what's your problem? And my first reaction was, it's you. But then I stopped. I said, no, it's not you. I said, it's the culture here. I said, I know I'm doing an excellent job. I see it in my reviews, but on a day-to-day basis, I don't feel like I belong here. And she actually came out and she said, you really don't. That was a red flag.
Mm.
But I was almost glad afterwards that she said that, because it got me to realize I don't want to be here anymore. This is not for me. But not all of us are lucky enough to have that happen or to be able to walk away from something. Um, I was worried that my husband was going to look at me like I was crazy and say, wait a second, we need your income. What are you going to do next? But instead, he said, you got to do what you need to do. I was lucky. My first
Good.
marriage, that never would have happened. This marriage, 40 plus years, yes, he knew what to say to me. And it has worked out. But it's worked out because I chose to go out and find those tools. I didn't know they were called tools. I didn't know anything about a toolbox. In fact, the first therapist I went to, she kept telling me that I had to learn how to smile more. And it was like, well, I think I am. And she goes, no, you're not. But if you smile, the endorphins will kick in. And if they kick in, you're going to feel better. So I went home for a couple of weeks and tried smiling all the time, and the endorphins weren't kicking in. I wasn't feeling better. So I switched therapists, like you talked about, until you find the right one. And I walked in and she goes, what do you want to work on? And I said, don't tell me to smile. I said, but I have to understand why I have all this frustration and anger in me.
Yeah.
And she didn't take me back to childhood. We started right where I was. And like you said, what does it feel like? And I said, I feel like somebody's kicked me in the gut. And she said, so if somebody physically did that, what would you do? I said, well, I definitely would walk away from it. I wouldn't keep going back for more. And that's when my healing began, because she said, okay, we're going to learn to walk away from it. You don't have to put yourself in that danger. And it sounds like that's what you're talking about with your coping skills, is that when you hear danger, 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 okay, where's my toolbox? Is this going to help me now? Oh, it's not helping me enough. I better grab the next thing. And eventually, you sort of do this naturally.
Right.
You don't necessarily think about, well, I'm going to my toolbox to get this out of there.
Right. And it's important that you understand that people understand that you have to create and build your toolbox and work on your toolbox, because it won't automatically come to you. So there are going to be times where you have to physically or mentally sit down and go through that specific tool until it becomes automatic. And it will. Eventually it will. Like my check the facts honestly comes to me all the time now. And it works wonders for me.
Well, I took a course 2 years ago in positive intelligence, and it was the best thing that I could do. Now, one of the things they have you do is when thoughts are coming to your mind that are invading your space, they call them PQ rubs, and you're supposed to rub your two fingers together, your thumb and I would do it, but according to the exercise, you're supposed to feel the lines in your fingers. Mine are smooth. I don't feel the lines. So for the first couple of weeks when I was doing it, I was getting aggravated. I kept saying to the coach, this isn't working. I don't have any lines in my fingers. What is this doing for me? And she said, I don't care if there's lines. What does it feel like? Does it distract you enough not to go to the place that you don't want to go? I said, yeah. She said, okay. Now, the person who invented this had lines in their fingers. Most people can feel the lines in their fingers. If you can't, that's okay. And she said, if you don't want to rub your fingers together, do something else. It's almost like your own personal mantra that says, I need to take another path right now. And it doesn't mean we're not going to stumble, because I'm sure in your journey, you have stumbled along the way.
Oh, absolutely have. And, that's that roller coaster. One day you're going to be feeling good. You're going to, feel as though a weight has been lifted off you. And then the next day you wake up and you wonder why you're still there. You know?
So how can my listeners learn more about you and what you have to offer? Because I'll tell you, you know, learning about Moody, it was like, this is something that I need. I don't know if I need Moody herself or if it's something else, but I've been sort of racking my brain for the last couple of weeks. What is it that I need that I can tear apart before I explode and then put it back together to gain the calmness that I need? So how can we follow you?
You can find me at our website, which is www.mymoodymonster, all one word.com. And I'm on a lot of different social medias, and that's where I do my Moody talks. I also do Moody Story Time, which is Moody and I, we sit down and read a book about big feelings. So every week we have those, and they're on YouTube, and they're in a playlist form so that they can continue to play if that's what you want to, just kind of like a podcast that it'll roll through. And yeah, I'm on my social medias. I'm on Instagram and let's see, Facebook and Threads and TikTok. TikTok's the one. Yes, and they're all under My Moody Monster.
Well, we're going to have that all in the show notes. So for those of you listening, there's no excuse to say, oh, I forgot about it. Yes, you can replay the podcast. That would be great, but you don't have to replay it. You can just go to Jennifer's sites And I want to thank you so much because for those who are listening today, it happens to be Wednesday, October 2nd. And 8 years ago, to not quite this date, but just about, as the Jewish holiday started, my mother was in her last 10 days of life. We didn't know that. We knew that it was coming, but wasn't sure. And I was living with her. And I tried making some of her delicacies, even though she really wasn't eating. And every year about this time, it strikes me. I only had another 10 days with my mother. And those 10 days go right with the Jewish New Year. And so about this time every year, I go through, why wasn't I a better daughter? Why wasn't I whatever? And I know I was as good as I could be to her. But I want people to understand that we have traumas of all different kinds in our life. My trauma that I created, and we do create our own, I believed for so many years my mother and I had a love-hate relationship. And it was in those 2.5 months that I spent with her that I realized we both loved each other dearly. We just had a strange way of communicating it sometimes. So I want people to know that therapy, coaching, a Moody doll, getting that toolbox together is so important, because without it, the next 10 days would be horrendous for me. I just have to keep remembering the good parts of it, but know that some of that sadness is going to creep in.
Yes.
And I'm going to have to decide when to shove it away. But it's only my tools that will help me. So Jennifer, thank you so very, very much. Have a wonderful day. And I hope all my listeners follow you. That would be great.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Karen. It was a great conversation.
Thank you. Bye-bye now.